It's a historic day, dear Motorsport-Magazin.com friends and Formula One fans, and it's ending now. The Super Formula One Sunday did not disappoint. First, qualifying early in the morning, then the Grand Prix was moved up. I hope you didn't miss anything. I hope you watched the video and were informed. Yes, and then came the big surprise. Max Verstappen has done it again. He won a Grand Prix for the first time since Barcelona. This is the first time since June, and from pole position, he made a crucial decision in the championship on an incredibly exciting day. Let's begin with the formation lap. We'll leave out the qualifying for now, though there were dramas, 5 crashes, and Verstappen was eliminated in Q. We'll get to that later. But we are already going into the race now, into the formation round, and Lance Stroll has caused the first drama. In turn 4, he went off. It looked a bit strange. Fernando Alonso also had brake issues later in the race. Aston Martin expects it. That there was a brake failure. Excuse, take a guard or not, doesn't matter. The most unfortunate thing about Lance Stroll is that he had a minor crash, which was truly the worst part. He managed to get the car running again, but on his way back to the track, he got stuck in the gravel pit. And it really did look quite silly, I must say. What happened next was quite a bit more curious, because all the pilots then made their way to the starting lineup, and it was clear to everyone involved, this race cannot start like this if Lance Stroll is stuck in the runoff area. The director, being aware, halted the beginning in order to prevent any issues. The announcement came that the start was cancelled, and Lando Norris simply drove away. That situation might have seemed odd to certain individuals, while it did not appear unusual to others, because there is indeed a procedure where the start is aborted and the drivers then take off. At that point, it will be shown extra formation lap, start has been aborted, extra formation lap. This is a standard procedure that is utilized whenever there are no issues and all drivers are positioned in the starting lineup. And just when everyone is already standing there, then there's a problem. Then a driver raises his hand, then it's obvious that it could be dangerous if someone bangs into him. Typically, the start is aborted and there is an extra formation lap. However, that was not the case here. It's a different procedure. If the initial start is cancelled, there won't be an additional warm-up lap, and the drivers will remain in their starting positions on the grid. Then the entire process restarts, with a 10-minute signal and so forth. Lando Norris and George Russell have taken up the top spots on the grid, with Norris leading from the front and Russell behind in second place. As a result, the front row is currently occupied by these two drivers. It looked very strange, and then race director Niels Wittich eventually said over the radio, "Okay, we'll have an extra formation lap, otherwise we won't get this right, if those in front take off and you stay back." In any case, the entire field completed the formation lap in the end. From the very start, it was evident that something had gone awry. On the part of race control, one could say that the signal to cancel the start arrived a little late. It was clear earlier that this wasn't right. It's effective, just like a leisurely walk. But then they took their time. Lando Norris was already in his starting position, and only then did they announce, yes, start. It's cancelled, one can say. Perhaps protects him a little, but of course he is not actually allowed to drive off if the traffic light does not turn green, and if he is not standing on it, extra formation lap. That's why the stewards looked into it, but not during the race, even though it actually happened before the race. They didn't look at it during the race, but only afterwards, so we had to wait a very long time for a final classification. The ruling imposes a fine of €5,000 and a warning on Lando Norris, while George Russell, identified as one of the primary wrongdoers, also faces consequences. They were at the front of the first row. All the others, the racing bulls, also had to answer to the stewards. They were just followers who were led astray, and that's why, yes, for which there is no penalty. For Norris and for Russell, the $5,000 and a warning. One must say, they really got off lightly with that. Yes, while it's true that the race organizers may have been slightly slow to react, thus potentially protecting the two drivers at the front, such incidents simply should not occur. The incident clearly impacted the race, as the entire field was required to complete an additional formation lap, and this ultimately resulted in the race being shortened by 1 lap. It's important not to overlook this fact. Back in the old days, one would likely have had to start from the back of the field, so it turned out relatively well. This was probably also because they only reviewed it after the race. During the race, it could have been a bit tougher. Regardless, Lando Norris was not fortunate in this race. It could have been significant points for him in the championship, starting from pole position, but he lost the lead to George Russell right at the start. Once again, in the opening meters, one might argue, however, in these weather conditions, even during the race, heavy rain fell sporadically. I believe it is forgivable though. However, the scenes that determined the outcome of the race occurred from lap 24 onwards. Charles Leclerc made the first move by entering the pits and changing his tires to intermediate ones. What was the reason behind this decision? Well, the rain had intensified slightly, the intermediate tires were already somewhat worn, and the team thought, let's put on fresh intermediate tires. This way, we will gain an advantage and reduce the risk of slipping. Unfortunately, Ferrari's plan did not quite work as intended, as they underestimated the amount of time they would require and got stuck in traffic. It didn't quite work out for Ferrari. They got stuck in traffic because they had underestimated how much time they would lose in the extremely slippery pit lane exit. That's why it was a suicide mission for Ferrari, but you could see that they were expecting to need a fresh set of inters to cope with these conditions. Then there was a VSC phase triggered by Nico Hülkenberg, and then everyone said, okay, we'll take this opportunity now and put on the fresh intermediates. The leadership duo of George Russell and Lando Norris also made their mark. They really pushed hard at the front. Yes, and then they got their tires. After that, there was a VSC ending, and they came in a bit unlucky, but nothing had happened up to that point. Actually, then Franco Colapinto had a severe crash with the Williams, which led to a safety car phase and subsequently a red flag, so there was a race interruption. During that moment, the drivers who weren't in the pits and had recently changed their tires found themselves in a fortunate position. These included Max Verstappen, both Alpine drivers, and Valtteri Bottas. They were lucky because they were able to switch tires without wasting any time during the race interruption. However, this turn of events greatly upset Lando Norris after the race. He expressed that he believed it was all a matter of luck rather than strategic planning. In fact, he went so far as to suggest that Max Verstappen only managed to win the Grand Prix because of this particular advantage. Eventually, it dawned on him that his speed was so formidable that he would have likely overtaken us all if he had started at the front. Therefore, it was incredibly fortunate that the red flag appeared, causing a pause in the race and granting those who were outside the opportunity for a pit stop without any penalty. However, this factor was taken into consideration as well. For example, prior to his pit stop, Lando Norris had already expressed his desire for new tires, and so on. On the other hand, Russell strongly insisted on staying out, but the team made the final call, leaving him immensely frustrated. Although many had predicted that the race conditions would worsen to the point of needing a stoppage, there were several signs that supported this notion. One such example is Esteban Ocon's response over the radio when asked if he wanted fresh tires. He firmly declined, saying no, let's stay out. Red Bull also expected these circumstances, going as far as suggesting that the deteriorating conditions would lead to race interruptions earlier than anticipated. Therefore, it was not a stroke of luck in the end. However, the decision to take advantage of the red flag did not prove beneficial due to a lack of speed, rendering it ineffective. Valtteri Bottas's performance once again clearly exemplified this, as he was once again relegated to the back. The Alpine team had an exceptional performance, with Esteban Ocon and Pierre securing second and third place respectively. This achievement brings significant points for the Constructors' Championship. It's important to note that their success wasn't a mere stroke of luck. They displayed consistent pace even before the chaos ensued due to red flags and pit stops. At one point, Esteban Ocon was just behind Russell and Norris in third place. The Alpine car performed impressively well in the rain, and both drivers delivered commendable performances. Clearly, this wasn't solely a result of luck. We will soon delve deeper into Max Verstappen's performance. We invite you to carefully consider our print magazine as your first choice. Now would be the ideal time to secure your Christmas presents, as time is running out. Additionally, you have the option to give this exquisite print magazine as a gift certificate to your loved ones. Voucher, Motorsport-Magazin.com is a perfect surprise to place under the Christmas tree. We will provide you with a skillfully printed voucher, ready to be dispatched. Alternatively, you can indulge in a print issue for yourself. It's truly special to be engaged prior to the 100th issue. Now we return to this spectacular Brazilian Grand Prix and take a closer look at Max Verstappen. Since joining Formula One, he has been regarded as a great master. He has already had a sensational rain Grand Prix in Brazil, so it wasn't entirely surprising. However, in qualifying it was wet as well. He was eliminated in Q2, finishing only in 12th place, and then he received a penalty for the engine. So he starts from 17th place, and to win from 17th, it takes more than just a bit of luck. He himself described it as an emotional roller coaster. Despite his initial anger, he managed to triumph in the race. The reasons for his frustration are unclear. Perhaps his poor 12th place in qualifying played a role. Some blame the race control's delay and red flag for preventing Max Verstappen from completing his lap, while others were able to do so. Consequently, he was eliminated early and unable to make it to Q3, resulting in the advantage of having one less set of intermediates for the second half of the race. Ultimately, this should not have posed a problem for him to be insignificant. Then, at the start, 2 positions gained because Alexander Albon couldn't start at all. Lance Stroll already crashed in the formation lap, so it ended up being 15th place. Then, in the first lap, a sensational start from 15th to 11th. Christian Horner was raving about it. He said it was like Senna at Donington in 1993. It was one of those very special starting laps. It was truly spectacular. A lap later, Lewis Hamilton took 10th position, and before then, Charles Leclerc initiated a wave of pit stops, with Max Verstappen quickly moving up to 6th position. He made a significant leap forward before the red flag was raised. As a result, Verstappen took advantage of the opportunity for a tyre change, placing him in 2nd position just behind Esteban Ocon. At the restart, he couldn't be a threat initially. Ocon was leading and controlling the pace. Verstappen chose to hold back, citing the poor conditions as a reason not to take risks. The team echoed this sentiment. Naturally, he had to consider the championship at Alpine, where a race victory was potentially on the line. Then, a safety car phase occurred. Verstappen seized the opportunity immediately. Lap 43 could be the pivotal lap in this championship. Max Verstappen at the restart. He overtakes Esteban Ocon. He seizes the lead, claims position 1, and proceeds to clock the fastest laps one after another. It is an absolute spectacle, an awe-inspiring display of fireworks up ahead. Ultimately, he held a commanding lead of nearly 20 seconds. It's mind-boggling. On the flip side, at lap 43, Lando Norris encountered mistakes, perhaps his 2nd, 3rd, or even 4th error of this race. Let's start with the beginning, which ideally should never have transpired. Then there's the moment he surrendered his spot to George Russell. Martin did manage to regain that position from Russell, only to endure a slight off-track excursion and wide turn at 4, compromising his position once more. Finally, during the safety car restart on lap 43, he unintentionally veered straight ahead in turn 1, slipping down 2 places, falling behind a teammate and another driver. In the race against Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris was gifted a position by his teammate. However, this was clearly another mistake on his part, prompting questions about whether it was the pressure of the championship battle or if Verstappen is just the superior driver. McLaren insists otherwise. Team principal Andrea Stella took the blame, stating that their car was simply unpredictable. It was incredibly challenging to drive under those conditions, as evidenced by Oscar Piastri's struggles in qualifying, where he frequently overshot turn 1. Therefore, Lando Norris should not be held responsible. We must enhance the car. This raises the question, does McLaren share blame for not waiting for the red flag? One might say it was luck, as we discussed earlier. Alternatively, one could reasonably expect that red will eventually come. Andrea Stella states, "We faced greater challenges. The others behind can afford to take more risks since they have less to lose. We need to conduct a sensible race at the front. If the red flag hadn't appeared, the others would have looked quite foolish. A safety car was deployed and the others would have been on used tires without a significant lead. On the other hand, Red Bull says, wait a moment, our tires were still in very, very good condition. Therefore, we didn't even consider getting intermediates and making an extra pit stop for that." One could argue whether it was fortune or the diligence of luck. In the end, was it a strategic move? Did McLaren make an error? McLaren vehemently denies that it was the fault of their strategists. This was strongly emphasized by Lando Norris and frequently discussed on the team radio. Regardless, it was an unequivocal decision that predetermined the outcome of the championship battle. If you had asked me after the qualifying session who had a higher chance of winning the championship, I probably would have said that the scales were tipping towards Lando Norris. He secured pole position, while Verstappen languished in 17th place, despite McLaren supposedly having a faster car overall. The pace of the McLaren was actually not that good today either. That's a big mystery. It makes you wonder what was going on. Sure, they didn't have any intermediates in the second stint, whereas Verstappen did. But yes, if you'd asked me after qualifying who would win the World Championship, I would probably have been leaning towards Lando Norris. Then this race and now Max Verstappen has a 62-point lead. We have 3 races left, including a sprint. Las Vegas, the next race, which will be the first match point in the World Championship. Max Verstappen only has to finish ahead of Lando Norris, and then he's world champion. So nobody would have expected it to turn out like this the morning after qualifying. But he made up 18 points on Lando Norris, then in the Grand Prix. And yes, it can happen that quickly. It can happen just as quickly for Mercedes. You've already heard, George Russell was one of the culprits at the start, causing the extra formation lap. That's why he received a fine of €5,000 and a warning. Mercedes also received 2 additional fines of €5,000 for an infraction before the first proper start. It's all a bit confusing, but you'll soon understand what I meant. Following the cancellation of the start, a new 10-minute signal was issued. The entire procedure was then initiated, allowing the mechanics to return to the starting grid. During this time, they also adjusted the tire pressures on the Mercedes vehicles. However, this adjustment is only allowed when the tires are off the car. I am not permitted to adjust the tire pressures while they remain on the vehicle. This is outlined in Technical Directive 003. The intention behind this is to prevent the FIA from encountering difficulties in monitoring the minimum tire pressures that Pirelli requires. Mercedes has breached this rule, but they got off with a warning. It could have just as easily led to disqualification as, if taken strictly, it constitutes a violation of the technical regulations, or more accurately, a technical directive. The stewards decided to show mercy. Why? Because they concluded that the FIA could verify and confirm that the tire pressure was consistently adhered to, therefore there was no infringement. Then, of course, we also had a very strange procedure on this race weekend with this schedule, which was adapted. They turned a blind eye, and the pit lane had a completely different setup to the rest of the race calendar. The pit lane is 1 level higher than the start-finish straight, and it's actually not that easy to get from the pit lane onto the start-finish straight, especially with equipment. So there's a real traffic jam at these small steps if you want to get onto the grid. It's pretty spectacular in Sao Paulo, and for the mechanics, of course, with equipment, so much more difficult. And that's why I said, all things considered, yes, this shouldn't set a precedent, but let's show some leniency, turn a blind eye. $5,000 fine per car. For Russell, it was of course bitter. He had hoped for much more. Lando Norris was confident that he deserved to win the race, expressing his disappointment at not taking the top spot. Russell, on the other hand, put up a strong fight against Norris throughout the entire race. However, when the red flag was waved, Russell's position dropped to 4th. Surprisingly, Lewis Hamilton, a renowned racer, had a disappointing performance, finishing in 10th place. He labeled the race as terrible. Before the race, I was fortunate enough to have a chance to demonstrate the Senna McLaren. It was a series of unfortunate events for Hamilton, with nothing going right. The Williams team had an even worse experience, encountering a complete disaster during qualifying. 2 cars collided with barriers, Franco Colapinto suffered a crash, and Alexander Albon had an even more severe accident at the end of the main straight. Albon suspects a brake issue led him to overbrake the rear axle. Lost control, crashed hard. He was then unable to take part in the race. A bitter pill to swallow. The second time he's destroyed his car so badly that it couldn't take part in the race. Of course, it was a different story in Australia, with a different spare parts situation and a different schedule. Now, there was really hardly any time to repair the car, which is why he couldn't take part in the race. But then in the race, Franco Colapinto had a serious accident, even during the safety car phase. Indeed, this setback is quite significant, and we are all curious to witness how Williams will recover from this challenging situation. The scarcity of spare parts and the increasingly tight budget cap add further complications. It will be intriguing to see the makeshift cars that will participate in the Las Vegas race. We could endlessly discuss this incredible Grand Prix and Formula One day, and I am confident that we will. To provide expertise, we have enlisted Christian Danner, who will be featured in the AVD Motorsport-Magazin. If you want to engage, you can ask questions using the hashtag #unscathed. With some luck, we might have the opportunity to relay your queries. To Christian Danner, I am eagerly anticipating the expert's opinion on this race. We are planning to have an extensive discussion and write extensively about it. Formula One, without a doubt, was an absolutely amazing day.